Recently in the news, particularly in the sports world, there's been an interesting contrast of two worldviews. And I think when you look at these two distinctions, they certainly play into a lot of the debates we've had on my show and on this website over the years. And that's the debate about standards and honor and hypocrisy. And, in certain situations, can we act differently in order to make a point or to win a battle or to be pragmatic, so to speak. And I thought about this debate when watching the national media reaction to what's happening at Brigham Young University this week. BYU suspended who's likely their second best player, one of their leading scorers and their leading rebounder, suspending him in the heat of March Madness for the rest of the season. He's gone. He won't play another game for a team that some folks were talking about being a #1 seed in the upcoming NCAA tournament. Now, why did they suspend him? Any kind of criminal action? No. He violated the university's honor code. What did he do to violate the university's honor code? Well, he had sex with somebody he wasn't married to, or what our grandparents used to refer to as fornication. That's against the honor code of the world's preeminent Mormon institution. And for that, he won't play another basketball game for BYU and their basketball team this year. And this stance, this wanting to uphold the code and to make sure that while the nation is watching, that they understand that here at BYU, they don't consider themselves first and foremost a basketball school or an athletics program, but essentially a university that's trying to train up people to further their worldview, whether you agree with it or not. And understanding where their priorities lie, they made the decision to suspend this young man for the season. And it could very well be a very expensive decision. Darren Rovell from CNBC, who's one of the top sports business reporters in the country, he reported today that BYU could lose $1.3 million. That would be their share for every NCAA basketball game they would win during the NCAA basketball tournament. So you think about it, if they were to go to the Elite Eight, which is a #1 seed, isn't that far-fetched, that would mean they could have earned up to $4 million. That school now won't get if indeed they lose early because they're without perhaps their second best player. And in this era of budget cutbacks and layoffs, those aren't easy decisions to make, even at a private school like BYU. They should be commended for making the decision that they made and upholding their honor code and their own integrity, whether or not you agree with the worldview behind it. And I don't. I'm not a Mormon. If I believed in Mormon theology, I would be one. But I certainly respect anybody's consistency of their worldview, particularly when their basic morality aligns with my own. And I contrast that with what's happening right now in the SEC. There's a lot of smoke that perhaps Auburn University knew a lot more about the money that its star football player, who's about to be a top pick in the NFL draft, Cam Newton, and his dad were peddling for his services during his recruitment last year. Now, what's interesting about this is that Auburn University is coached by Gene Chizik, who used to be at Iowa State University. I remember the first time I ever met Gene Chizik. I sat with him one-on-one in his office for 3 hours, discussing life, faith, football, why he came to Iowa State. And one of the things that I will never forget about that meeting is that he had yet to unpack his office. He had just taken the job. He'd been on the job for only a week or two. He had yet to unpack his office except for one thing. There was one thing laying out on Gene Chizik's desk, and it was a box set of CDs about being a Christian and being a coach and how to stand up for your faith while leading young men. And I remember Gene Chizik trying to organize sort of a Promise Keepers event up at Hilton Coliseum during his first year as well. And I remember that because he now finds himself potentially embroiled in a scandal. And then you throw in Cam Newton's father, the one that we at least know for sure peddled his son like a common pimp to Mississippi State University for upwards of $200,000. Do you know what Cam Newton's father does for a living? He's a pastor of 5 churches down south in Atlanta. 5 churches. So here we have the Mormons standing up for what they believe publicly, with the nation watching, even if it will cost them and cost them dearly. On top of the money you would get for winning an NCAA basketball tournament, the prestige that you get as well, the exposure for your university, they're going to say no to that and stand up for their standard. On the other hand, we've seen plenty of examples of evangelicals in the sports world, like the Gene Chiswicks and the Cam Newtons, saying, you know, I think I'm going to go for mine. Standards be damned. And I'm reminded as well of what happened at Notre Dame University recently, where the world's preeminent Catholic institution and the Catholic Church has fought for the sanctity of life valiantly now for 5 decades. And with the world watching, they chose to invite the most pro-infanticide president this nation has ever had to give the commencement address at their university 2 years ago. And you know, over the years, we've had a lot of debates about how we can vote for candidates and what candidates we ought to vote for, and the whole debate about whether or not you can, if you're a Christian, you could vote for a Mormon. All that came up when Mitt Romney ran for president. Perhaps, after looking at the actions of Notre Dame University, a Catholic institution, after looking at the actions of evangelicals like Cam Newton's dad and Gene Chiswick and all the evangelical leaders that I've interviewed over the years in the so-called pro-family movement and their willingness to compromise what they believe for a seat at the table, you know, perhaps the question we really ought to be having and the debate we really ought to be having is whether or not Catholics and evangelicals, whether or not they can actually vote for themselves. Thank you for visiting here at stevedeace.com.